The wind kicked up the dust like ghosts, pacing the dirt, swirling past tired boots and tired eyes. August Mercer stood beneath the slanted shadow of the auction scaffold, one hand resting on the horn of his saddle, the other buried in the pocket of his worn coat. He hadn't come here for this. He needed seed, maybe a new hoe. Not this. But the lot shifted. A new form was dragged forward, slight barefoot, wrists clamped in rusted iron. A girl, no older than 20, maybe younger. Her face hung behind a curtain of dark, tangled hair. She didn't look at the men, didn't flinch when they laughed. She just stood there, wind pressing her faded dress to bone and skin. She ain't speaking. The trader barked, breath thick with liquor. Don't bite neither. Could be useful if you don't mind 'em. Mixed a few chuckles, some spit in the dirt, but no offers. Not even one. August's jaw tensed. His fingers brushed the leather of his wallet, but didn't pull it. Seen plenty of broken things in this world, horses with spirits snapped, men too, but this girl didn't look broken. She looked buried. She shifted once, and in that moment, the wind lifted just enough of her hair to catch the glint beneath it, a small wooden cross strung on worn leather. Not jewelry, not showy. Something carved by hand, rubbed smooth from years close to skin. He stepped forward. $5, he said, voice quiet. The trader blinked. What's that? I said 5. Someone in the crowd muttered, Hell, for that price, she's yours. And just like that, no one argued. The chain was unfastened. The girl didn't cry, didn't thank him. She just stood, eyes low, and followed. The ride back was long. Cold seeped into the saddle, and the sky turned bruised with winter. She didn't speak once. Sat in the wagon bed, arms crossed, as still as stone. August tried not to glance back, not often. But when he did, she was looking at the cross in her hand like it was the only thing real. By the time they reached the ranch, dusk was folding itself over the hills. Smoke curled from the chimney, and snow lay in patches where sun no longer reached. August unlatched the gate, the familiar creak like a voice he hadn't heard in years. He led her up the porch steps and opened the door. You'll take the corner room, he said, pointing. There's a stove in there. Water pumps out back. She nodded once and stepped inside without a word. He brought her a wool blanket, thick and heavy, and set it on the end of the small bed. She sat, but didn't unfold it, just stared at the far wall. Her hands, he noticed, were raw, rope scars maybe worse. Next morning, she hadn't touched the food he'd left out, stale. Biscuits, bacon cold from the pan. She stood outside by the fence, coatless, staring at the land like it stretched farther than any map dared. When he offered her his wife's old shawl, folded neat in his arms, she didn't move to take it. I don't expect nothin' from you, he said, just figured you'd be cold. She reached out, fingers slow, and took it. Didn't thank him, but wrapped it around her shoulders and turned back to the hills. Days passed like smoke. She kept mostly to herself, speaking only when necessary. He learned her name from the way she murmured it to the cross, once. Near the barn, Clara, she wouldn't sit in the rocking chair, though he often caught her staring at it from the doorway, the way a child looks at a locked room. It had been his wife's, worn smooth at the armrests, the seat creaking softly in the breeze. One evening, as the sky went to blue ash and coyotes cried from the ridge, August stood at the doorway with a coffee cup and said, not expecting anything, I built that chair for her after the baby died. She'd rocked there at sunset. Clara didn't turn. Just watched the horizon. She passed 4 winters ago, he added. Never thought I'd bring anyone back here. Still no answer. But her hand brushed the shawl's edge. Just once, the welcome was cold. It's quieter than grief, but deeper somehow. Neither of them knew what would come next. Only that she was no longer chained. And he had given $5, not because he believed she was worth so little, but because he believed no one else would, and maybe that meant something. Or maybe it didn't. But as the fire crackled low and snow whispered against the windows, Clara finally stepped onto the porch. She didn't sit in the chair, only stood beside it, and That was enough. For now. The days turned slow and pale. Winter sat heavy on the roof, its silence thicker than snow. Clara moved through the house like breath, light, present, gone again before you noticed. She didn't ask what needed doing. She just did it. August would find his shirts folded at the foot of the bed, the floor scrubbed raw around the stove, and once a loose window pane nailed back without a word. He never saw her do these things, so only noticed the aftermath, neatness, stillness. The quiet pride of someone who once had nothing and learned to value order more than comfort. One afternoon, he returned from hauling firewood to find something fluttering on the wash line. First he thought it was just linen, but as he stepped closer, the shape stilled him. A dress, white, old, but well kept. His wife's it hung like a ghost against the cold sky, washed, dried, and mended. Even the torn lace at the cuff had been restitched. His jaw clenched. Hadn't touched that trunk in years. Hadn't opened it. And yet here it was, the fabric of a life gone, touched by hands that didn't ask permission. He stepped into the house. Boots tracking snow, breath tight in his throat. Clara was at the hearth, brushing ash from the brick edge with her sleeve. She didn't look up when he entered, didn't speak. "You found the dress," he said. She nodded once, then continued brushing. "You could have asked." She didn't stop, didn't stiffen. She said low, it was folded wrong. Mold was setting in. Swallowed the knot rising in his chest. Anger didn't feel right. But neither did the ache that bloomed behind his ribs. He wanted to tell her not to touch things that weren't hers. That memory had a scent, and it didn't like being stirred. But the words felt too sharp for the room, too harsh for someone who walked like she'd been broken in more ways than her chains could explain. Later, he found her in the barn. She was standing near the old tack wall, staring at a wooden chest tucked beneath a shelf of saddle oil and broken spurs. It was small cedar, carved with simple patterns. His wife had used it for beadwork, sewing threads, bits of hand-tied ribbon. The shawls inside were all made by her, bright, strong, wild-colored. Clara's hand hovered just above the lid. Not touching, just remembering something she'd never lived. "You shouldn't be in here," August said from behind her. She turned slowly, didn't flinch. "Why were you in chains?" he asked, voice rough. She looked down at her boots then. At the dust gathering in the barn's corners, her fingers clenched, then released. "Because no one stopped them," she said. "Not the first time, not the second." Silence stretched between them, as brittle as old rope. August looked at the way her shoulders curled slightly inward. Not fear, habit, as if protecting herself from words never spoken aloud. "You're safe now," he offered, unsure if it mattered. She nodded. But not an agreement, just acknowledgement. That night, the wind howled through the chimney like an old wound. August poured 2 mugs of coffee, brought one out to the porch. She was sitting there, wrapped in the shawl again, watching the dark stretch its fingers across the field. He offered the mug. She didn't take it. He left it beside her and went inside. In the morning, the mug was empty. He found it washed, too. Left upside down on the counter to dry, August began to notice other things. Small gestures. She avoided touching the walls. With her bare hands, always faced the door. She would not sit with her back to the window. He saw her flinch when horses neighed too loud, or when the stove cracked too sharp. But there were other moments, too. One morning, caught her smiling faintly as she braided a strip of rawhide for the pantry hook. Another time she hummed. Under her breath while cleaning the glass of the lantern, her voice was low, rhythm old. A tune from a language not taught in books. He didn't interrupt. She was a woman built out of things people left behind, scraps of memory. Corners of songs, cross carved by hands that must have loved her once. August didn't ask about that person. He didn't ask who carved it, or why she still wore it even after everything. Some things weren't meant for questions. But once, as he passed her in the hallway, she looked at him. Just for a breath, and in her eyes was something unguarded. Not trust, not yet, but the absence of fear. It was enough. The wind came first, sharp and biting, curling beneath the eaves and slipping through cracks in the old window frames like fingers seeking something to grip. August had seen winters like this before, but not in years, not since she passed. He stood on the porch as the sky turned gray and mean, watching snow fall sideways. Pulled hard by the breath of the north, he called the horses into the barn, bolted the doors, and stacked firewood against the inside wall. Clara stood at the kitchen window, her hands still from washing. She didn't ask what to do, just started lighting candles. By nightfall, the storm swallowed the prairie. Winds screamed around the house, flurries spinning in wild circles. The chimney groaned inside. The fire held, small, steady. A heartbeat in the quiet August worked at the corner table, repairing the old harness, hands calloused and slow. Clara sat near the hearth, mending shirts that hadn't fit him in years. Her fingers threading needle after needle without pause. They didn't speak, but their presence filled the space like warmth. The silence no longer felt hollow. At some point, a steady drip began near the stove. August looked up. Dark spot. Bloomed on the ceiling, the roof had split along a warped beam. He stood, grabbed the ladder from the barn wall, hauled it into the kitchen. "I'll need another pair of hands," he said without looking at her. She rose, didn't hesitate. He climbed first, pushing through the hatch into the crawl space. Above, she followed, boots crunching soft wood dust, fingers bracing against the beams. As she reached the top, her shoulder pressed against his, not hard, just enough to remind him that she was real and here, and not afraid to stand that close. They worked in quiet rhythm. He held the patchboard while she nailed it in place. Hands red from cold. Air smelled of dry pine and the wax of old candles. The storm's voice was a deep hum above them, as if the sky itself grieved. When they climbed back down, their boots left a trail of powdery snow on the wooden floor. Clara shook out her braid and returned to her stitching. August poured 2 mugs of coffee, slid one to her without a word, then returned to his bench. That night, he awoke to soft sounds from her room, not crying, not sobbing, just murmurs, low, and rhythm-bound, words in another tongue, not English, Cherokee maybe. The syllables rose and fell like prayer. He didn't open her door, only listened, hand on the frame, until the sound ebbed and gave way to silence. By morning, snow pressed, heavy against the windows, a dull white light washing everything flat. Clara was already sweeping the floor, a tune on her lips. Not loud, just a gentle hum, the same melody she had muttered in her sleep. It filled the space between them like smoke, curling through the rafters, clinging to the cabin's bones. On the table near the fire sat the Bible open, its pages worn. She had placed a dry leaf inside, folded delicately between the parchment. August picked it up. The page was marked Isaiah, "Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be white as snow." He looked over at her. She wasn't watching him. She just kept sweeping, that tune still in her throat. Later, as dusk settled and the wind died down, August stepped outside. The world was white and still, like the land had forgotten how to breathe. But inside the cabin, the air was warm, carrying the scent of coffee and stitched cloth, of wool drying by the fire. He sat in the rocking chair. Clara brought him a tin plate of boiled potatoes without a word. He nodded. She set it down and turned to leave, but she paused, then said quietly, "The roof won't hold another storm like that." He looked up at her. The firelight lit the curve of her cheek, the edge of the shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "Then I'll fix it before it comes," said. Clara nodded once. Her braid swayed as she stepped back into the hall. He watched her go. Something had changed. Nothing grand, nothing spoken. But the cold outside no longer bit quite so deep, and the silence they shared now felt less like absence and more like peace. The wind had settled, but the cold lingered. Outside, the land was hushed under snow, but trouble never stayed quiet for long in these parts. Word traveled like smoke, winding through saloons and fence posts, up to porch steps and into mouths that liked to spit before they thought. It came on a Tuesday. August spotted the riders long before they reached the gate. 2 horses, moving slow, deliberate, One wore the badge of the law, the other rode with shoulders too broad and a sneer that felt familiar even from a distance. August didn't wait inside. He stood on the porch, arms crossed, the weight of the rifle heavy, just behind the doorframe. It's the sheriff, a worn man named Dalton, dismounted first. He tipped his hat with a hand that had seen too many compromises. "August," Dalton said. "Cold one." Always is," August replied. The second man dropped from his horse like he owned the dirt beneath him. His name was Triplorn, a ranch hand who worked south past the ridge. August remembered him well enough. His kind of man never left your memory, not when you'd seen the way women flinched when he passed. Clara didn't come out, but he knew she was watching the curtain. In the side window shifted once, then stilled. Dalton sighed, boots crunching in the snow. "You picked up someone at auction a few weeks back." "I did. There's concern she wasn't rightly sold. Some say she's mixed blood, that she was taken, not traded. That her last place was Tripp's to claim. August didn't move. I paid the price asked. I offered her shelter. That's the only claim I care about." Tripp stepped forward. "She ran," he said. "Took things that didn't belong. I just want what's mine." "She's not a thing," August said, calm but clear. "And you're not laying hands on her." The air between them tightened. Dalton looked at the rifle propped just inside the doorway, then at August's still hands. His eyes shifted to the window where Clara now stood, barely visible, just her hand pressed to the frame, the cross at her neck faint in the glass. "You sure you want to make this stand, Mercer?" Dalton asked. "I've made it," August said. Silence, then Dalton turned, boots cracking as he stepped back toward his horse. "Don't bring her into town for a while," he muttered. "Not everyone out there's as quiet as you." Glared, spat, but followed, they rode off, the snow swallowing hoofprints behind them. Inside, the cabin was warm again. But Clara's hands trembled as she poured coffee that night. The mug clinked against the table as she set it down too fast. The heat from the kettle fogging her glasses. August didn't touch her, didn't try to still her hands. He just sat across from her, one palm flat on the table. "No one's putting chains on you again," he said. She didn't respond, but her shoulders eased, just enough to notice. Later, as the fire burned low and the wind returned in soft sighs across the window panes, Clara sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the shawl folded in her lap. She reached for her braid. It was short, just a tuck behind her shoulder, but she tied it neatly, precisely. The way women did when they wanted to say something without opening their mouths. August saw her walk past the doorway. Saw the braid. Said nothing. But something burned inside his chest. Not from the fire, but something older, deeper, like a door he'd forgotten had ever been locked, quietly coming unlatched. He went to the porch, sat in the rocking chair. The stars above were ice bright, the prairie wide and silent again. Behind him in the cabin, the floor creaked once, then stopped, and he knew he wasn't the only one who'd made a choice that day. The snow melted slow that year, like the land wasn't ready to wake up. Patches of thawed dirt peeked out beneath drifts, stubborn and dark. The creek behind the barn began to trickle again, faint but steady, and the air lost its sharpness. With the cold fading, a different kind of quiet settled over the ranch, not hollow, not heavy, just still. August found himself working longer in the garden plot, turning the soil with worn hands, checking fences he knew didn't need mending. And Clara, without needing a word, began to work beside him. She'd bring seeds wrapped in old fabric, her hands careful with each placement. He never asked where she'd found them. She began to speak more, just a little. Simple things, the names of plants, the way certain birds nested under the porch. Once, she showed him a word in Cherokee Doli, safe. She wrote it with a stick in the soft dirt. He said it wrong the first time. She laughed, really laughed, and the sound startled them both. It became their rhythm. Quiet meals, long walks around the edge of the property, moments of shared work where neither needed. To explain what came next, when he burnt a batch of biscuits one morning. She looked at the smoke, then at him, and shook her head with a smile that didn't leave her eyes for hours. Each morning, she sat by the hearth and read a single passage from the old Bible. Her voice was soft, steady, not from habit, but from choice. She always marked the page after with something simple: a feather, a folded stem, a dried curl of bark. One afternoon, he found her sitting on the porch steps, shoulders hunched against a breeze that still had teeth. She wasn't wearing anything warm, just her dress, faded and thin. August stepped back into the house and pulled the old shawl from its chest. His wife's. He stood behind Clara for a moment, the fabric in his hands. She didn't move. When he laid it gently over her shoulders, she flinched, just slightly, then froze. "I can't," she whispered, eyes forward. "It's yours." "Now," he said, voice low. Her fingers clutched the edge of it, knuckles tight. And then she crumpled forward, the weight of it folding her like paper. She didn't sob, not loudly, just wept into it, silent and deep. Not because it was soft or warm or beautiful, but because no one had ever given her something without. Expecting something back, August sat beside her and didn't speak. His hands stayed in his lap. He watched the wind press against the grass in long waves. Later that evening, they both sat in the rocking chairs, hers still too big. His worn at the arms, side by side, in the glow of a sky that was slowly learning to be spring again. They rocked out of sync, then in sync, then not at all. A flock of wild geese passed overhead, wings stretched in perfect order, their cries echoing against the hills. Clara watched them as they disappeared into the far sky. "They return every year," she said, eyes tracking the last bird. "I used to think I would too." August looked out across the field, then down at his calloused hands. "Then maybe this is the year," he said. She didn't answer, not with words. But her shoulders relaxed, and her hands, still holding the edge of the shawl, loosened just enough to breathe. Inside the cabin, the fire burned steady.
Outside,
the frost had finally loosened its grip on the land, and between them, something new, not loud, not sudden, but real. They came just after sunup. Not with a warrant, nor with reason, but with dust in their wake and hate coiled behind their teeth. 3 riders, faces shadowed beneath wide brims, spurs clinking like threats. Triplorn led them, the same man, who once dragged Clara into the back of a wagon, with her hands bound and her voice lost. August had been feeding the horses when he heard the hoofbeats. He didn't rush, just set the feed bucket down and walked back to the house. Calm as a man walking into church, Clara stood on the porch. She didn't move when she saw them, but her hands found the cross at her neck and closed around it like it might keep her steady. Trip pulled his horse short at the gate, dust curling around his boots. "I told you," he shouted, voice sharp as ice. "She was mine. You bought her like she was livestock, and she still don't belong to you." August didn't say a word, stepped between Clara and the men. His rifle hung at his side. But it was the stillness in him that spoke louder than steel. The 2 others dismounted, younger, meaner looking. One of them stepped forward. "We ain't here to make a scene, just take back what's ours." Clara's voice cut through the wind. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. "I was never yours." The men turned to her. Her face was pale, but she didn't flinch. She stepped down from the porch, slowly, the shawl wrapped around her like armor. She didn't hide behind August. She stood beside him. She held up the cross around her neck. The light catching its worn wood is the only thing. "That saved me." And he never tried to take it. Trip's lip curled. "You little she stays." It was another voice now, with Sheriff Dalton. His horse came into view around the bend, the town trailing behind him like a whisper. A few townsfolk stood further back, men who never had much to say, but always listened when trouble knocked on a neighbor's door. Trip scoffed. "That right, Sheriff?"
Dalton
Didn't look at Trip. He looked at Clara. At August, then nodded. "Once. That's right. You touch her again, and you'll answer to more than one man." The 2 riders hesitated. Trip's bravado thinned. He spat once in the snow, then climbed back on his horse. Without another word, they turned. The sound of hooves faded into silence. Clara stood still until the last echo vanished. Then, her breath left her chest in one long, steady exhale. Her hands were still at her sides, no longer clenched, no longer trembling. That night, August found her in the kitchen, braiding her hair by the light of the oil lamp. This time, it wasn't a short braid tucked behind her ear. It ran long down. Her back, deliberate, clean, proud. Not a symbol of captivity, a declaration. A woman deciding who she was. She wore the shawl like it belonged to her. Not because he'd given it, because she'd chosen to wear it. They sat on the porch after supper. Rocking chairs creaking in rhythm with the frogs in the stream and the wind whispering through dry grass. The sky was wide and dark, stars. Hung like scattered nails across black velvet, August turned toward her, his voice quiet. "If no one told you to stay, would you?" She didn't answer right away, just looked ahead at the barn, at the fence line, at the hills wrapped in. Moonlight, then her gaze came to rest on the firelight flickering through the window. The chair beside her, the shawl at her shoulders. "I already have," she said. The wind carried her words across the porch and away. They'd been waiting all winter to be said. And in that stillness, in the hush of what didn't need to be spoken, something heavy lifted from both of them. Chains didn't always clang. Sometimes they were the silence between breaths, the weight of unsaid things, the fear of soft places. But tonight they were gone, and in their place, peace.